Good afternoon, everyone. We are so glad you are all here. I know there are many amazing people, behind the scenes out there that are on the Zoom with us today, and I just can't see you. I wish we could all be in person, but we are grateful and can't wait to the time we'll be again in person for this kind of important meetings. We have a full agenda today, so I'm going to get right into it. I'm Michal Grenchen-Weiss. I'm the director of the Social Policy Institute at Washington University in St. Louis, and I'm joined by Dana Lohnberg, Executive Vice President of Operation and Technology Product at MasterCard. This is the first of 6 events that we'll conduct about inclusive growth in St. Louis. These events are part of a partnership between MasterCard, Center for Inclusive Growth, and the Social Policy Institute, and is powered by a passionate and committed advisory committee, which is made up of a dedicated St. Louis residents. We will give them the appropriate introduction they are so deserving in just a minute. Each event is designated to ignite conversation about the opportunities and challenges of economic growth in St. Louis. We want to outline who this economic growth is leaving behind, why, and identify ways to address it. We also want to amplify the voices in our community that are already working in this space, because there are so many great efforts taking place in St. Louis. I would like to take a minute to let Dana talk a little bit more about our partnership.
Thank you, Michal, and hello, everybody. St. Louis is my hometown, and St. Louis is MasterCard's hometown. Over the past couple of decades, our region has seen tremendous growth and has become an incubator for companies at the leading edge of technology and innovation. But that growth has not been shared equitably, and people are being left out and left behind. MasterCard's committed to decency, equity, inclusion, and I'm really proud to say we created the Center for Inclusive Growth because we believe that the benefits of a growing economy should extend to all segments of society. Unleashing people's economic potential starts with connecting them to vital networks that power our modern economy. But in St. Louis, many communities are disconnected from these networks. They're really prevented from achieving financial security. They're prevented from seizing opportunities that can empower themselves and their families and our communities. And we really see the impact of this inequity everywhere, in financial services, in housing, leadership, education, the workforce, the list goes on. And you'll hear these themes in our speaker series today and in the other 5 events that we'll be sponsoring. We're committed to leveraging here at MasterCard all of our assets, our talent, our data, our technology, and our philanthropy in support of our hometown, St. Louis, and turning our challenges into opportunities that can chart a new course and really set the example for our nation of how a community can build an inclusive economy. That's why MasterCard's made a $500 million commitment to racial equity, including launching new programs and initiatives right here in St. Louis, which you'll hear more about from my esteemed colleague, Marla Blow, later. And it's also why we've partnered on this series, not only to start a conversation. We don't really just want to hear ourselves talk, but we want to bring together decision makers and community leaders, yourselves, to build partnerships and build solutions that can transform St. Louis. We're really excited about the potential of these events to really spark change of mindset, but more importantly, to make change ourselves.
I totally agree, Dana. This is going to be a great set of events. Today, the discussion is about building inclusive economy. As I said, we could not have done any of that without our phenomenal advisory group, and I would like to recognize these folks before we begin. I'll leave you all a minute to read this, names of this wonderful committee. This group was intentionally selected for their community advocacy, impact, and passion. We have learned so much from this group as we develop these events. They have informed every aspect of the event, and we are so grateful to each one of them. And now, this is a great opportunity to introduce another two of our community members, Sherry Flanging-Vanzek and Daphne Moore, who will help us dive into today's event.
Hello, everyone. I'm Daphne Moore, Chief Opportunity Zone Officer for the St. Louis Development Corporation.
And I'm Sherry Flanagan-Vasquez, Chief Operating Officer at Justine Peterson. And as McCall and Dana said, future events in the Inclusive Growth Series we will dive deeper into a variety of topics that we'll cover quickly today. But today our goal is to give you a glimpse of some of the major contributing factors of an equitable economic growth and well-being in St. Louis. We will discuss some of the long-term impacts of inequitable policies and identify opportunities for real inclusive growth.
We'd like to kick things off by getting to know you a little bit more. In the chat, you'll find instructions and a link to Menti. The results will appear live on the screen. And the question is, what's one or two words that describes the importance of inclusive growth?
As those answers are coming in, we want to tell you about what our community or what our committee thinks is important in building an inclusive community. There are many factors that contribute to creating and sustaining an equitable community, including both current and future and past policies, funding, and simply not putting our residents' needs first. As our committee discussed in the context of planning these events, several themes emerged.
We found most of our conversations fits into four buckets: household financial security and wealth building, access to education, training and technology, neighborhood investments that do not displace residents, and leadership. We need more diverse voices represented in the decision-making at all levels and in all industries.
Look at all those amazing words coming in. This is going to be a really fun 90 minutes. Today you'll hear from MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth. They've spent time looking at what makes an inclusive economy both nationally and locally in St. Louis in what they call an inclusive growth scorecard. Then 4 individuals will present on each of the themes that Daphne mentioned. Finally, we'll invite 3 neighborhood advocates for a dialogue on what this really means for people living in St. Louis. And we know you'll have burning questions at the end of those 90 minutes, so we invite you to join a topical dialogue session of your choice to get into the subject a little bit more in a smaller group.
Before I introduce our friends from the center, I'd like to turn your attention once again to the chat for a link to a PDF. This document helps us create a shared language and definitions for things like inclusion, equity, and equality. This is the foundational language for each event in this series. We also included a theory of change. This is what our committee hopes to spark throughout this series. While we hold ourselves responsible for the outcomes and the short-term change, we hope that you will be inspired to help us through long-term change through policy. Okay, it is now my pleasure to introduce Marla Bowe and Arturo Franco with the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth.
Thank you very much, Daphne, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm really excited about this conversation, and I appreciate all of the work and the commitment and all of the participation and support that make it possible for us to engage on this critically important topic. I want to pick up on the thread that Dana started off mentioning in her kickoff remarks here, and really just touch on a bit more about what we mean and why this is so important to MasterCard in our $500 million 5-year commitment to supporting Black communities. Our work really takes 3 primary forms. One is working on the economics of place and understanding how to drive investment in specific communities within a market. And Arturo will talk about that in a lot more detail here with his inclusive growth score. That is an incredibly impressive insight generation opportunity that can be used by economic development professionals, public sector leadership, and others that are looking for very granular information about markets. In addition to those 2 things, we are also looking at how we close the racial wealth gap and supporting small business and supporting access to capital for small business. And so there we'll be looking to work again in the future with Justine Peterson, and we just have a member of the Justine Peterson team here today. We've worked with them in the past, and we look forward to working with them again in the future in supporting community development financial institutions in making it possible for small business to have access to the programs and to have access to the liquidity and capital that they need in order to continue to grow. Another piece of that is really also about ensuring that there is the opportunity to convert to digital and enabling ultimately sort of moving businesses that have previously had a door on Main Street and sort of a front door in the physical world to having a digital door. And so MasterCard has a digital doors platform that allows small business and facilitates all the pieces that small businesses need in order to move online and be able to provide e-commerce and support their businesses that way. And then the last piece is really, in terms of our commitment, is looking at skills building and how people are able to have access to opportunity and closing the opportunity gap, and looking at what it means for people to be able to navigate our increasingly digital economy going forward from here. And so our commitment there will ultimately drive support for reskilling programs and changing the face of MasterCard's employment. And so we will be looking at our own employee base, looking at the skills requirements that we've set up and been using, and look for opportunities to address that and adjust that so that we can ourselves commit to and participate in creating more opportunity for Black communities. So I am super excited about leading this work and really taking a large step forward in changing the dynamics in our society and putting us in a place where we can ultimately look and see real change in what our landscape ultimately reflects. So I'm going to stop there with that as a lead-in and really turn to Arturo and let him talk through the Inclusive Growth Score toolkit that he has built and demonstrate how it works. Arturo?
Great, thank you, Marla, and so pleased to be with all of you. I've been at MasterCard for 2 years, and as you know, as Dana just mentioned, we have a big office in St. Louis, and I was about to go and visit St. Louis in April this year. So now it's on my bucket list. I've never been there, but I will be there as soon as it's possible. And as Marla shared, we have also been thinking about what are these ingredients that make an economy actually not leave people behind and make the growth and the benefits of the growth shared more equitably. And in that exploration, we came to a concept which was epitomized by David Brooks in the New York Times in an op-ed saying, what if the neighborhood and not just the individual was the essential unit of social change? What if we did, if we looked at the whole ecosystem of place of a neighborhood and tried to do several things at that level, at that unit of analysis, to try to affect change and improve people's lives. And so that took us into the field of place-based economic development and realizing that it's not just people, individuals and households that have been left behind, but also places. And so last year we created a data visualizing tool that combines publicly available data with assets and insights from our own MasterCard data. And we launched it as the Inclusive Growth Score. This is publicly available. Any of you can very quickly sign up and look at the US. And what's behind it is an idea, a concept of how we believe you can actually see the development of a neighborhood or a community in terms of inclusive growth. So I'm going to delve very quickly into what measures and variables we put into this tool. And then I'm going to try to show you an example using St. Louis and a couple of census tracts there. So the Inclusive Growth Score, as you can see on the first column, measures 3 pillars. It's made up of place, which is how the housing, the infrastructure, the built environment of a community is developing. The second pillar is economy. It's about the business growth, the job growth, the opportunity, and spending, which is a variable that we can easily follow. And the third pillar is about the community. How is this the community in this neighborhood developing from an economic and a social well-being perspective? So if we follow those 3 pillars, we can see on a yearly basis how a neighborhood is evolving, and we can compare it with neighborhoods around it, with neighborhoods in the city, with neighborhoods in the same state, or with neighborhoods that are similar to this neighborhood all around the country. But we didn't stop there, because we had the notion that measuring growth was not enough, that we needed to also think about how the growth is distributed. So we created both growth variables, as you can see on the last column, which are about net occupancy, how many people are coming in to live in that community or leaving, real estate values, what is the overall value of the housing of that community, are new businesses being created, are small businesses getting loans, things that can tell you about the economic dynamism and the growth of the community. But we also included inclusion variables. And inclusion variables are a little bit more about how much access different segments of society have to these benefits, right? And so is housing affordable for everyone? Do people have internet access? What is a commute time? What is the level of commercial diversity? Which means, are there different types of merchants in the community or just the same type of merchant? And we're measuring things in the community pillar that measure inequality, the Gini coefficient, educational enrollment for kids under 5 years old, female poverty, which is a measure of social progress as well. And so when we combine all of these elements and we score each neighborhood from a score of 0, which would be the worst, the neighborhood that's growing in the least inclusive way, to a 100, which would be hypothetically the neighborhood that's growing the most inclusive way, we can say some really interesting things about the country, the states, and the city. And so I'm going to go into the tool. I need to do a little switch here. And this is a live demo, as I said, so we can explore it together. But what you will find in the tool is that you can search for any community in the United States. So I'm going to go to the city. And the first thing I observe when I look at this, let me tell you a little bit about the color scheme. So we decided to make red the lowest scores. So in a sense, it's a neighborhood that's on fire, that's not doing very well. And we decided to make green the highest scores. It's blossoming. It has to do with growth, right? And so when you go from red to orange to yellow to light green to green, you are following an inclusive path of economic development. So you can clearly see something that all of you already know, which is there are at least 2 cities within the city. And you guys are going to go deep on this. I'm just going to show you the data for now. Now, there's a really cool trick that we can do with this tool, which is to Daphne's point, we can highlight the opportunity zones, which is one of the use cases that we wanted to apply to this type of data. And when you highlight the opportunity zones, by the way, you can see this in 3D. I've never found it useful, but you can. When you highlight the opportunity zones, you can start to tell a story. Our first data point is 2017, before the opportunity zone incentive started. 2018 is the first year of the incentive. 2019 is the second year when we started seeing most of the investments happen. And so we're going to continue to measure this, through time. And we hope that as a good wine, this will become a better tool as we have more years of data. But you can already clearly see, I want you to focus on these two census tracts here. You can see that the one on the top, this one, is going to become green. And the one on the bottom from 2017, 18 to 19 is going to become a little bit more pinkish. And so the tool allows you to look deeply at one census tract and see the scores for all of the things that I mentioned before. So here, if we choose this census tract, we can go deep into the data. But the tool also allows you to compare two census tracts. So you can actually choose both of them and add them into the tool and see how they compare through time. And so I think that this is a tool, but most importantly, a methodology that could be used in the conversations that you're going to have over the next sessions to try to explore some very unique cases of specific neighborhoods where your local knowledge, where your experience, where the work that you are doing on the ground can help us validate that the measures that we are putting into this tool are actually a good or a useful way of measuring inclusive growth at the community level. Ultimately, what we want to do is equip community leaders, equip decision makers with the right tools to make the best decisions possible. So this is the Inclusive Growth Score. I'm very happy to share it with you, and would love to continue taking part of the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that helpful information, Arterio and Marla. As our first speaker prepares to present, we would like to hear from you. In the chat, you will notice there's another link that has been added that you can ask your questions from Menti. So if you could, please tell us in 1 to 2 words, what makes an economy inclusive? And I'll give you all a moment. So when I think about an economy inclusive, I think about words around diversity, I think about words around growth, as well as resources and opportunities as well when we think about that. And so with that, thank you all for taking a moment to provide your Q&A in the chat. And so with that, I will now turn it over to our first presenter. And so with that, I would like to take a moment and introduce our first presenter. And so with that, first up, we have Ms. Toni Cousins, Community Outreach Manager for Missouri Housing Development Commission.
Thank you, Miranda, and thank you to everyone who invited me to be a part of this very important discussion. I too am a St. Louisan, born and raised, and have much passion for what I do, and the hopes of where and how I know St. Louis can actually grow. I want to make sure everyone is able to see this screen. Miranda, is this okay? Can everyone see this?
Yes, thank you.
I am actually going to kind of go into what was just discussed before. When we look at what our number one issue is right now in the exclusive growth of St. Louis, what has really impacted us more than anything is COVID. COVID has really exposed the ongoing challenges for people of color, not only on the health aspect, but also housing and economic challenges that we see everyone is being faced with today. Housing is one of the major factors that's affecting the communities of the North Corridor of the city of St. Louis. Just looking at the model that was presented before, it pretty much showed that the North Corridor of the city is the hottest of the hot spots, those that are being beyond underserved. And right now, with what MasterCard is trying to do, the time is now to become a model of a truly inclusive economy that benefits everyone. Not trying to be negative, but I want to really look at and talk about how when that slide was presented, you saw Clayton had the biggest growth and it was green. And we see that and hear that often. And for a lot of people that's not from St. Louis, that's not St. Louis City, nor is that the North Corridor of the city. Looking at the equity score, the city of St. Louis, especially in the North Corridor, is 48.25 on the average. Looking at how we are number-wise for home loan originations, 8 times as many home loan originations per capita, and majority is in the white tract census. I'm sorry. So those are things that we really need to look at, looking at the capacity or the vacancy. 9 times as many acres of vacant land and buildings are in the majority Black census tracts as it is opposed to the white census tracts. Each community is different, and we must understand that. Do you honestly believe that people really want to live in high crime areas? Despite the trends across the nation, the trend in St. Louis is different. The North Corridor does not receive the investment that it should based on the great needs. I don't know about you, but that's very concerning to me. When we look at the demographics and how dollars are actually earmarked for states, especially for the city of St. Louis, is based on the low economics within the community. 90% of the community for the city of St. Louis that is low economic is that within the North Corridor of the city. However, we do not receive nowhere near the amount of development or the resource needed to basically bring those communities up to date or up to standards. Dollars are earmarked in various areas, affordable housing, CRF, and as well as CARES Acts, but the communities are still distressed. Trends across the city of St. Louis. We see that Black residents in the city of St. Louis are more likely, than white residents to live in low opportunity environments. I never want to always put things white versus Black, and it's more so what we're dealing with in the economy that we're dealing with today is basically in reference to dollars. Where are the dollars being spent? What situations are being presented to ensure proper dollars are being spent and allocated into the different areas? And you don't see that. Residents in majority Black neighborhoods are more likely to live in neighborhoods suffering from disinvestment. Why? Why are we put in situations that we can't understand or get the necessary resources needed in order to build the communities up? I stated before, not everybody wants to live in a high crime area. There are multiple factors that create situations like that. not taken away, but because of the experience that I've had, you often find, and I've stated it before, you cannot do multiple subsidized housing within one community. That totally takes away the economic impact of a community, and we've seen that occur. In the past, there's been organizations that have actually brought affordable housing within a community as well as low income, but they've done it as a blending mechanism instead of just putting an entire community in a low opportunity area. That in itself brings about crime and various things because there's no education that should be presented to those communities on how to sustain a community. Residents of major Black neighborhoods are less likely to have access to amenities than residents of majority white neighborhoods. It's just factual. But all of this is based on the economic impact. The break the cycle. Current funding opportunities support investments in communities with greatest needs. I'm gonna say this again. Current funding opportunities support investments in communities with the greatest needs. If that is the case, we should start looking at the developers that we're actually working with, those developers that are working within the North Corridor. We should come up with means and ways to provide them support systems to adequately provide services across the board, which I have seen has not happened. It goes in spurts or and most people are operating in silos. And when you operate in silos, that's why you see the North Corridor is on fire, so to speak, based on what was presented before. You cannot be a developer, you cannot be an investor and go into a community and think, if I put this house up here, this will change things. If I put this business here, this will change things. That's not how the community works. Definitely not how the community in the city of St. Louis and the North Corridor works. You must understand each community that you're going into to work in. Are you going in it only to make a profit for that short term, or are you going in it for a long-term aspect and seeing how you can be impactful in a long-term way? Most organizations don't understand the impact of the utilization of the holistic approach. What that approach really is for a developer, for an investor, and for a community is going in and identifying the needs of each individual community. You cannot assume the need that Clayton has is the same need that Walnut Park has. You cannot assume that the need that Dutchtown has is the same need that the Gate District has. You have to go into those communities, speak to the residents within those communities, speak to the organizations within those communities to understand what the need is before determining what you're going to bring into those communities. Most communities do not work and operate without trust. Far too many times, the North Corridor has been affected by misleading or false hope, and that in itself brings down a community. Before I was into Missouri, before I started working for Missouri Housing Development Commission, I actually was over a CDC organization. Two things always stuck out to me. The residents in that community came and they were like, Ms. Cousins, are we really going to get this? Is this really going to happen? They wanted hope and they had hope. But my job was to present to them and work with them and identify what their need was and ensure that their need and our need was the same. Another thing that stuck out to me was someone decided to do an article on how bad Walnut Park East and West was, how the land was there, the dilapidated buildings. And I could have easily allowed that person to let that story run and not speak on behalf of that community. But I had an opportunity to speak to that particular person and said, that's not true. You come, you take a tour with me and let me show you the soul of this community. And yes, he retracted his story and gave the true version of what this community was actually standing for and what it can do. Meeting with the community to determine needs to offer long-term solutions. Oftentimes, people are looking for what's quick, what's now. Even with the CARES Act dollars are introduced as a segue to help sustain what has broken or what has been falling. We should as organizers work together to see long-term what we can do to resolve a lot of the issues that we see that are facing these communities at this time. Leveraging dollars to simultaneously invest in people in the community. Again, don't just think not throwing a shade at NGA or bringing NGA in is going to be the be all to change things. What is the long-term plan to change and enhance the North Corridor? The community benefits when developers work together. I cannot express how much we have to stop working in silos. For so long, the city of St. Louis has always focused on this is my area. I don't have to focus on what's going on in that area or that area. But truth be told, when you leave behind those that are suffering, it's going to at some point affect those that are not suffering. And that's the state that the St. Louis city is in right now. Yes, Clayton may look good. Things are looking great for some parts of the south part of the city of St. Louis. But if you notice, things are really starting to go downhill for a lot of the city as a whole, because we have forgotten about the area that is much more in need of assistance. We have to now start working together as organizations. When I see organizations like St. Louis North Star Community Partners that are starting to form to look at the fiscal aspect of things and how they can actually work together, then that's huge, especially when you're trying to focus on how do you identify developers that are really in need of the financial resources and direction and understanding on how to implement and do different development within the different communities. When you have one group coming together, working with other organizations, it becomes more impactful. And my hope is if we see more organizations like St. Louis North Star Community Partners coming together, that red will then hopefully turn orange or whatever, then turn green. That's the hope on the development side. But you cannot build homes, do major developments without providing social service to those communities. You cannot sustain a community without providing social services to meet the needs of those people that are still existing and living there. They love their communities. They speak on behalf of their communities. And that's where organizations like Social Resource Collaborative Foundation has been formed to then say, this is the role we can play in providing and identifying funds to assist organizations that are truly grassroots and truly working to try to make a difference to the residents within the North Corridor that is needed. The other part that I want to just touch lightly on, because that's who I get paid for, is, I'm sorry, Miranda, the last thing is to please go to MHDC website, because when you go to our website, you will find various documents and information on how and what funding is available to assist the different areas, especially for developers. Thank you, sorry. You're on mute, Miranda.
No worries. Thank you so much, Tony, for your presentation. We have a couple of questions from the audience. And so I want to make sure that for the sake of time that we're able to get through these questions. And so the first question is, are there any banks actively working in North St. Louis to do substantial investments for Black-owned small businesses and homes?
There are banks. I know Enterprise Trust Bank is one that is working. I know Simmons Bank is really working to try to come in and to do some assistance. You are really starting to see a lot of the banking industry that's seen where the need is in the North Corridor, but they're just trying to connect with the organizations that are really trying to meet those needs.
Thank you. And so when we think about, and you referenced this in your presentation, the NGA site. And so how does the development of the geospatial intelligence complex factor into investment in North St. Louis? And then the second part of that question, is there a change or in the trend, or change in the trend, I'm sorry, or does it not invest where investments are needed?
And this is from my opinion. I just got to make sure I make that disclaimer. In my opinion, I think it does. It basically just shifts, so to speak. It shifts where NGA at one point was south, was more South City, South Downtown, or what have you, but now it's within the North Corridor. So it gives the ability for investors to come in and do, more investing or different opportunities. But if you notice what has happened, you've had some housing developers that tried to come in to do construction, and it's not working. The reason why, in my opinion, that's not working is because, again, they're not assessing the need of that particular community. Your assumption is those that are coming into NGA are going to be the ones to actually live over there. And that's not necessarily the case. You have to do your research to understand the dynamic of that community.
Thank you. And I think we may have time for one more quick question. What are the priority social services that need to be offered?
Again, this is my perspective. Definitely, we need to get something going for youth. There are various programs in the past that have been funded to assist youth, which again will reduce crime. What I mean by youth, I mean really young adults. Our young adults are not as occupied as they should be. They have too much free time. But those services that you provide for those youth in reference to jobs will bring economic value within the community for which they serve. But those particular social services will also help your seniors, disabled residents, bring back rehabbing of existing properties that's there and helping them maintain those that are homeowners, because you still have a lot of homeowners within those communities.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Tony Cousins, for your presentation and taking time to answer questions from our audience. Okay, it's time for our next speaker. Please join me in welcoming Daryl Grimes, Interim CEO with Better Family Life, to talk about education and the workforce.
Thank you, Miranda. Again, my name is Daryl Grimes. I am the Interim Chief Executive Officer for Better Family Life. And I'd like to just thank those who brought this wonderful panel together to talk about these much needed solutions to our problems. I woke up this morning to a staggering number that made me sit up in the bed, and that was, as of today, 226 million people are unemployed. And I think as we start to talk about ways that will improve that number, we need to recognize how unemployment and education works as a launch pin for each other. Yes, COVID has changed the way we approach both employment and education. And I think that we need to start working together to come up with solutions, and I'm gonna say this with some certainty, no one organization, no one company, no one government has all of the answers for our problems. I'm gonna flip-flop today and start off by talking about workforce, and then I'll pivot that to education. In Missouri's workforce growth rate, it has lagged the United States average over 40 years, and over the past 10 years has even experienced some negative growth years. And this is according to the Missouri Chambers of Commerce and Industry. There's a general consensus among many Missouri employers prior to COVID-19 that there's simply not enough bodies to fill the open positions in the state. Not only is there a challenge with recruiting qualified, skilled job seekers, but in some respects, it's equally challenging to retain homegrown talent. Therefore, we lose them to other states. There are 75 million baby boomers, and every day for the next 11 years, 10,000 of them will reach retirement age. And this is a great concern here in Missouri, especially for skilled trades, as 53% of those workers are at least 45 years old. The bottom line is that we must change the way we prepare our labor force for the jobs of the future, because if we don't, employer needs will not be met, and we will have difficulty recruiting new businesses and retaining those that we have. The majority, the 53% that I was talking about of Missouri jobs are considered mid-skilled. This is essentially a range between high school diploma and no college degree. But sadly, just over 40% of Missourians meet this threshold. Thus, the governor's investment into workforce is not only necessary, but is critical. The irony is that if we know the data and we understand that there is a skills gap in Missouri, why do we place such heavy focus on the other 47% of careers considered high skilled in demand? Those industries include advanced manufacturing, precision medicine and biotech, and so on. But if we're to solve the Missouri workforce dilemma, we need more skin in the game. Therefore, there must be intentional and strategic partnerships between employers and training institutions and programs. There has been a challenge with the communication in that respect, and it's understandable to some degree. There are simply too many providers and programs for most companies to keep up with. More importantly, employers don't have the time to vet all of the workforce initiatives and offerings. And time is a huge factor, considering the old saying that time is money. Then therein lies the dilemma. The dilemma is this: how do we better communicate with employers regarding our programs and services? How do we train more skilled workers in the most time efficient manner to meet employers' needs? And lastly, how do we connect skilled workers with employers? These are the questions that plague us who are in social services. Better Family Life is one of those agencies who are at the grassroots. We still believe that knocking on doors and communicating with the community, those victims who are going through all of these things that we're talking about today, sometimes we don't even take into consideration that we need to get to the root cause and talk to those who are in those communities. So Better Family Life does just that. As far as education is concerned, strong and diverse and inclusive education in Missouri is essential. I'm gonna say that one more time: strong, diverse, and inclusive education in Missouri is essential to prepare us for the 21st workforce jobs. Missouri schools spend on an average of $11,249 per pupil, and this was as of 2019, compared to Illinois' average of $13,077 per pupil. Out of the Midwest states in 2017, Missouri was fourth in expenditure for the 879,845 pupils in the state. Missouri schools predominated by students of color received $23 billion less a year in funding than those with a majority white population. Schools in Black and brown communities are in need of social services to lessen the widening learning gap. And BFL, or Better Family Life, assists 9 of those under budgeted school districts at 48 school sites annually. There are 4 major problems that impact education achievement facing Missouri communities that BFL is addressing, particularly low-income Black families. 1, low levels of healthy family functioning, low levels of adult and child well-being, low levels of economic stability, and 4th one is high rates of poverty. However, through our best practice programs, Better Family Life meets the people where they are. We support them as they and walk with them through the pathway to success and work to eradicate social economic differences that impact the quality of their lives. Here's how we are addressing those 4 major educational barriers first facing Missouri low-income families. Low levels of healthy families functioning and adult and child well-being are using evidence-based and informed best practices to help the development of social emotional learning, resiliency, and healthy relationship skills. Better Family Life programs work with the schools to establish support and the conditions that promote successful education and achievement for children beginning in the elementary school, because 60% of Missouri's 4th graders are not proficient in reading, and this is not acceptable. Our focus on supportive services in the formative years help keep children on track to stay in school and graduate, pursue post-secondary education and training, and successfully transition to young. Low levels of economic stability and poverty are addressed through finance and money education, advocacy training, and career readiness skills training. Currently, 68% of our 8th graders are not proficient in math, and 11% of our high school students aren't graduating. Research and frameworks that are used to educate and inform on how to support individuals and families through these trying times and what resources they need to thrive in adversity or at capacity. Better Family Life services through workforce development, youth and family clinical services, housing and asset building departments focus on preparing everyone for the 21st century for success. And I would just like to say that this type of combination of participants on this subject matter is what's needed. I think that the more that we put our resources together and come up with solutions, because as I said in the beginning, not one agency has every answer. I don't care whether or not it looks that way, but it's gonna take all of us together, putting our resources together, talking together, putting down our differences. I really don't care whether Better Family Life is at the top of the pinnacle or whether we're in the middle or in the bottom, as long as we are contributing to the solution of helping in the workforce development as well as the educational success of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Daryl, for that wonderful presentation. We do have a couple of questions from the audience. And so one of the questions early on in your presentation, you were talking about the unemployment numbers. And so if you wouldn't mind, if you can repeat those numbers in terms of the unemployment numbers and also speak to where those numbers originated from.
These numbers originated from the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Depending on which ones you were talking about, I'll start with the 53% of the Missouri jobs being considered mid-skilled, as well as I think I mentioned the heavy focus that we place on 47% of careers considered high skill and in demand. So those two numbers we gathered from the Missouri Chamber of Commerce, as well as 40% of the Missouris met the threshold. So that's kind of where we got it from. Our numbers are still being collected. We have a robust workforce development program here where we concentrate on those low-income families. We have again a robust program that we're funded through the state for Missouri work assistance, as well as Skill Up for those who are on the public assistance. So that's where that came from.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a question around the numbers related to education, and we probably can put this in the chat unless you have it handy, Daryl. You quoted some numbers as it pertains to education.
I don't have my education numbers here as far as where we got them from. I can make sure that we get that information and then get that to whoever asked that question.
Thank you. And then one other quick question around early childhood trauma. So when you think about it, most poor children experience such trauma. What can schools do to address this?
Well, I think that what's going to have to happen is going to have to be a melding of not only school-based programs, but it needs to come also, for instance, from social service organizations such as Better Family Life, we go into those schools and we take our clinical department into the schools to address a lot of the mental health issues. We're working on other programs that are going to start to de-escalate when we start talking about violence among those school-aged children. We want to look at the root causes of it rather than try to get them at a later age. So our clinical department, our community engagement and development department are putting together programs that we can take into the school and address the problems of mental health, because we understand that a lot of our children, our teenagers are traumatized by what's going on with so much strife in the community and crime in the community these days. So that's kind of how we are approaching and how we're attacking this problem.
Thank you. And thank you again for your time and your presentation. As we prepare for our next presenter, I would like to acknowledge that we have a lot of questions that are coming in, and we're trying to get through these questions through the presenters and or through the Q&A. So keep the questions coming, and we'll do our best to get these questions answered either during the Q&A or individually through the Q&A chat. So thank you. Okay, it's time for our next speaker. Please join me in welcoming Lisa Potts. Lisa is a financial services professional with the People's Community Action Corporation and Financial Empowerment Coalition member. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Miranda. And I also want to just thank Washington University and MasterCard. And I am looking forward to playing with that inclusive growth scorecard. So today I am talking about household financial security and wealth building. And I want to talk about our current situation, how we got here, and what our opportunities are. According to the FDIC, 68 million adults in America
One moment. I believe we may be having some technical issues on our end. And so I'm going to give Lisa a chance to come back. And for the sake of time, we will move forward and we'll come back to Lisa because we want to make sure we honor the time that has been set aside. So with that, if you all don't mind, slight pivot. I would like to introduce our next presenter. And again, we'll come back to Lisa. Our next presenter we have up is Tony. And so Tony, feel free if you're ready to jump in for us while we get Lisa situated on her end with her technology. So Tony Neal is the President, CEO of Educational Equity Consultants and Executive Director of the Center for Educational Equity. Welcome, Tony.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be here. I too would like to thank Washington University and MasterCard for this workshop or this presentation, which is much needed in the St. Louis area. As we move forward here, my area is looking at training and leadership. And when we think of an inclusive community, we think of a community that is not only surviving, but thriving. We have to look at education, we have to look at healthcare, we have to look at criminal justice, we have to look at housing, and we have to look at economy. Now, of course, we don't have a lot of time to put a critical eye to each. And so because my background is looking at education and working in education, I'm going to pull out education from that group. However, as we move forward, I am challenging you to think about how this might affect some of the other systems that we don't have an opportunity to talk about at this time. So in my 7-minute road map here, I'm going to explore a process called the groundwater approach to understanding systems and how they operate. We'll take a look at some statistics. And then we'll do a little imagining. How do we imagine a new narrative? We are certainly in a time that has chosen us. We have not chosen this moment, but this moment has chosen us. So what does that look like to reimagine this moment? And then what does leadership for change look like? Of course, this is the moment. We can declare what is obsolete or what can be reformed and what must be reimagined as we think about change. When I think about leadership, when I think about training, I'll think about change. So let's examine the groundwater approach. You come outside and there is a lake in the front of your house and you notice one fish is floating belly up dead. It makes sense to analyze the fish. What is wrong with it? You know, was it something that poisoned the fish? Did someone go fishing and actually caught the fish and threw it back and the fish didn't survive? What caused that fish to be belly up dead? So the groundwater approach, if you come outside a second time to this lake and you notice that there are a number of fish, maybe half of the fish in that lake are belly up dead. What should we do now? What approach should we do now? Let's imagine that this lake is the education system. And just for the sake of this particular slide, we can pull out education and we can put in housing, we can put in healthcare, we can put in the economy, and you will still have the same fallout. But you come outside and the lake is the education system and half of the students are failing when we're looking at the education system. This time we have to examine what might the system itself be causing such consistent, unacceptable outcomes for our students. If we're looking at housing, what might that look like for residents, or healthcare? What might that look like for clients and patients? What might that look like for the economy and our business? So now you come outside and there are 5 lakes around your house. And you notice that half of the fish in each of the lakes is belly up dead, floating. What is it time to do now? Now it's time to analyze the groundwater. And what we know about groundwater is that in fact, 95% of the fresh water on the planet is above ground, is not above ground. So we see a connection underground. So we might ask the question in terms of this, the groundwater is what might be causing the contamination. In our systems, we might be asking the question, what is causing or what is upfront around marginalized groups? Why aren't Black and brown people faring as well as some of our white counterparts? Why don't they have access to goods, resources, benefits, rewards, opportunities at the same rate as those that are as those that don't look like myself? What might that look like? And so if we take a look at simply the education system, and again, we can pull out the education system and put in some of the other systems that we will need to address at some point. Now we look back at the education system as an example and see how under the surface, it is connected to similar disparities in other systems. So what might this look like? How is healthcare connected to education? How is it connected to housing? How is housing connected to the economy? How is the economy connected to the criminal justice system? How is the criminal justice system connected to education? So we can take a time and put a critical eye, a critical lens to look at what is happening in the system that needs to be changed. Under the ground, what does the groundwater look like? So let's take a macro look at some of the statistics, and I have cited some of the statistics there. I've given the source for each of the items that I have cited. And I'm not going to read these to you, but I give you a moment just to take a look. Some of the effects of systemic racism on Black Americans, and we can say Black and Brown Americans. I'll go to the next slide. As you are reading these, I like for you to think about the impact that each has on the system, not just the system of education, but if we were examining healthcare, if we were examining business opportunities, if we were examining housing, what might be the impact that these statistics that we see here might have on each of those individual systems? I'll go to the next slide. And so that's at a macro level. Let's look at a micro level. Forward through Ferguson in their most recent report, stillunequal.org, and you can certainly visit that site to get more detail. We're looking at the educational landscape. These are some elements that affect the educational landscape. And again, we don't have enough time to examine each. But one that I did want to take a look at is property taxes, because property taxes affects the resources that are put into our schools, how we hire teachers, how we bring in curriculum, and all types of resources that we bring into the school system. You can see here majority white district, majority Black district, and how that fares out. And what does that mean for the education system? How does healthcare play into this? How does business opportunities play into this? Those are just some questions that I throw out. And so what does it mean in terms of change? What types of training needs to be done? What are some 5 leadership skills? One is that we have to name the difference. Many times we want to lump or group everyone together in terms of, we have minorities that work in our businesses. We have minorities that are part of our school system. But where are those individuals located? Is it at the leadership level? If you look at lead the dynamics of differences, what are the necessary leadership skills to lead in conflicts? Claim your differences. What are the identities of those most likely to serve in leadership roles? So if you are examining, putting a critical eye to each of the areas, who's in leadership roles? What does that look like and what does that really mean? Adopt the policies and practices that make a difference. And then review reform. What does reform look like when we think of diversity and we think of strength? One company that has done an excellent job in trying to move the needle is Levi Strauss, and you can go to their website. Just this past year, they decided to do an audit of their entire company in terms of looking at where women were located in the company, in terms of leadership positions, where individuals of color were located. What does that mean in terms of hiring practices, who's on various committees? They looked at an array of different elements within a company, and they published the findings. And they also published how they were going to go and correct some of the challenges and some of the things that they saw were wrong or should be corrected within their company. So that is one way to think about training, one way to think about moving forward. And that is it. And I'm open to any questions. you're on.
Thank you, Tony. If
Sure.
you wouldn't mind, so one of the questions that came up, just for context, in terms of geographical location, can you speak to the difference in North City Corridor when it was a strong middle class African-American community 50 years ago compared to today?
Sure. Well, what you had, again, a lot of that goes back to property taxes. Goes back to the evaluation of property. Right now, I'm vice president of the Normandy School Board, and I've lived in North St. Louis all my life, not necessarily in Normandy, but in other areas. And we saw that there was a deterioration in housing. Businesses left. When businesses leave and housing values go down, you lose your tax base in terms of schools. And so that's when you saw the DSEG program set in. Many students left. When you have destabilized neighborhoods, you don't have individuals moving back into those neighborhoods. And so that is kind of what you saw. I think some of that is coming back. We are seeing neighborhoods coming back. We are seeing some businesses moving back into the north side. So hopefully we can get back to being a strong community and having viable and excellent schools.
Thank you. Thank you again for your presentation. As we prepare to bring Lisa back, just wanted to remind everyone that if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A chat. If we don't get to the questions, we will continue this conversation in breakout sessions. And again, we are working to get the questions answered as we move through today. Thank you again, Tony.
Thank you.
Bringing back Lisa Potts. Again, thank you all for your patience and flexibility as we're slightly pivoting from the agenda. And so Lisa Potts will continue her presentation now.
Thank you, Miranda. And I apologize. You know, we practiced this all morning, all week. And of course, when it's time for me to share my screen, my computer completely dies. It still hasn't come back on. And I'm sorry that I missed Daryl's presentation because I was too busy trying to throw my computer out of the window. So again, thank you to MasterCard and Washington University for this opportunity and for bringing this to St. Louis. I am talking about building an inclusive economy in St. Louis, our current situation, how we got here, and our opportunities. Next slide, please. According to the FDIC, 68 million adults in America are disconnected from the financial system. Currently, 17 million are unbanked. That means they do not have a bank account. And another 51 million are underbanked. And that means they have an account, but they still use check cashing places and pawn shops for their banking needs. More than 55% of Black households are unbanked or underbanked, the highest of any racial or ethnic group. And I will just add that in 2009, St. Louis was the home of the most unbanked African Americans in the country. And in fact, that's why we actually started the St. Louis Regional Unbanked Task Force. Next slide. Being unbanked can be risky in a lot of ways. A recent study of Seattle neighborhoods found that area payday loan lenders had higher crime rates than those neighborhoods that did not have them. When Missouri eventually replaced their paper benefit checks with the EBT cards in the late 90s, the crime rates in those counties went down when they transitioned. Next slide. The 2019 Prosperity Scorecard shows that too many families either are struggling to make ends meet or just one emergency away from a financial disaster. According to the Federal Reserve Bank, 40% of American households lack the basic level of savings, meaning that people are unable to come up with $400 in an emergency, without borrowing from their friends or family or selling something. And for $400, you're talking about a new tire. You know, maybe you need a new laptop for school because I'm about to throw my laptop out the window. You know, it could be a medical bill, but that's even worse for people of color who 57% of households of color do not have adequate savings. Next slide. So when you don't have a savings, what do? How do you get money to live? Because you still need to borrow money. So people are basically turning to payday lenders. And why? They're convenient. They're in their neighborhood. From what I understand, they're very friendly. 12 million Americans actually use payday loans each year. And 7 out of 10 of those payday loan borrowers are using it for renting utilities, although it's meant for more emergency services. Payday loan locations are also more likely to be concentrated in locations where there is higher than average poverty rates, lower income levels, more single parents, and more minority groups. If you live in St. Louis, you know exactly where to go to find a payday loan store. Next slide. Why did we get here? There are a number of reasons, and you've heard a lot of those reasons today, so I will just touch on a few. There are fewer banks in communities of color. We just talked about the number of payday loan stores that are available in our communities. And I'll also just note a statistic that our city treasurer likes to tell people, that there are more payday loan stores in Missouri than there are McDonald's, Starbucks, and Walmart's combined. So I want you to just think about that. And we know McDonald's are everywhere. White flight. As white people left the communities, so did the jobs and the businesses, and that left our neighborhoods in disrepair. Racist housing policies and practices, redlining, predatory lending, the denial of credit, low credit scores. These historic inequities make it impossible for many African American families across the United States to have the opportunity to tap into the equity building benefits of homeownership. Thus, Blacks have significantly less wealth today than their white counterparts. In St. Louis, we know this as the Delmore Divide. As you can see the graphic on the screen, it looks very much like the graphic that Arturo posted up earlier, where North St. Louis is in the red and south of St. Louis is in the blue. And that is the infamous Delmore Divide, where you have home values in North St. Louis at average $78,000, and literally across the street, you're at $310,000. So whites have 10 times more wealth. I'll just continue. Whites have 10 times more wealth than the African-American family. Gosh, she's getting that slide back up. Whites have the wealth of $177,000 per family versus $17,000 for African Americans. And so what are our opportunities? Did I get kicked out again? Thank you. Next slide. Next slide. What are our opportunities and what do we need to do to make our communities more inclusive? We need to increase home ownership opportunities. There is no greater asset than your home. We need to teach people the importance of insurance. Wealth is often passed down from generation to generation through inheritances. And there's all too often that people of color are using platforms like GoFundMe to bury our loved ones. We just need to be real here. We need to start telling people the importance of insurance and how it is affordable. Sarah, go back one slide, please. We need to increase asset building opportunities. There are some structural, some policies that need to be changed in Missouri, such as asset limits. People who are lower income are not even allowed to save and accumulate a certain percentage of money before they get kicked off of the benefits that they're currently on. So if you're on food stamps and you're receiving different government assistance, you're not even allowed to have a certain amount of savings. It's things like that that are holding our low-income communities back from being a part of this wealth building opportunity. We need more banking access, more programs like Bank On that we operate here in St. Louis and across the nation that provide safe and affordable accounts for people to join the mainstream. And there was no other time that this was made apparent through this pandemic. Mobile banking really holds a real promise for deepening the connection between unbanked and underbanked households. Because when the government decided to send people $1,200, who got their money first? The people who had bank accounts. And so we worked really hard to try and get more people banked during that time, because some people are still waiting on those paper checks. Financial education and counseling. We need more professional education and counseling in our schools and in our communities. And we do already have some of these great programs out here. We have Operation Hope, Justine Peterson, who's on this call, they do free credit counseling, but we need more, and we need it to start earlier. We need to provide education to our young people while they're in school. FDIC has free curriculum that starts at age kindergarten, and we need to do more of that, and we need to start teaching more of our children at home. Next slide. So I just wanted to talk about the last thing. There are some transformational ideas on the horizon. The most controversial, one of the things is baby bonds. So basically, when a child is born, they would automatically get an account for college. They're talking about guaranteed income. So those are some controversial things. And the most controversial, I would say, would be reparations. So thank you. And again, apologies for all of the technology issues this morning.
No worries. Thank you, Lisa, for your presentation. Given the information you've provided around access in terms of financial education and opportunities, are there any cross-sector collaborations among financial institutions? And this is kind of a broader question, but it gets to this as well. But any collaboration among financial institutions, philanthropy, and maybe even government entities in terms of inclusive economic growth here in St. Louis?
Yeah, although those numbers were startling among unbanked, I neglected to tell you some of the positives. We've been doing this work since 2010. And on average, people that are unbanked spend $1,200 annually on check cashing fees. So that's $40,000 in a lifetime. Do you know what you can do with $40,000? So there have been some, a lot of cross-sector collaborations. Just bringing our banks and our nonprofit partners together has been key. And I have to say that of all the programs throughout the country that are doing this work, St. Louis has always been on the forefront of collaboration. Our banks are not afraid to work with our nonprofits, and they're not afraid to work with one another. In no other place have I seen banks sit side by side, literally will share a table with one another, and they know each other's products so well because they're not about just telling people no. They want people to get the help that they need. And in order to be able to do that, you have to know what the next person is offering as well. You can't just say, well, no, I'm sorry, I can't help you today. But, oh, I may not be able to help you, but my friend over here can. And that's the level of cooperation that we have here in St. Louis among our bank partners, our nonprofit partners, and even our government leaders. Our city treasurer has the Office of Financial Empowerment. And so our city, through her office, is showing that they care about the financial health of our community, and they offer free financial educations and programs as well.
Nice. Thank you. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for questions. Again, we will continue this conversation in our breakout session, so please continue to bring the questions into the Q&A. But we invite you to join us for one of the topical breakout rooms after this conversation to continue this dialogue with a small group starting at 1:30. So we like to now step away from the statistics and get to the heart of it. Like, what does it mean for residents? What does it mean for individuals who are excluded from growth in St. Louis? What is the impact on our region and moving forward? And so for this discussion, I would like to bring on 3 awesome women to join me and provide some insight and input into this conversation. And so joining me, we will have Miss Sunday Whiteside, Julia Allen, and Kiara Anderson. Can you each introduce yourselves? And Julia, it's right to start with you.
Okay, thank you, Miranda. My name is Julia Allen, and I live in the 4th Ward, specifically in the Ville neighborhood. I've been a resident here for 70 years. I am actively engaged in my community with development, social economic development, advocacy, and social services, because all the things that the speakers before me talked about are key in making our communities healthy again.
Thank you. Sunday?
Good afternoon. My name is Sunday Whiteside. I am the president of SLACO, the St. Louis Association of Community Organizations. We are a coalition of neighborhood associations and community organizations within the St. Louis region and Metro East, working together to improve the quality of life of all residents. I reside in the Walnut Park East neighborhood and was instrumental in founding the Walnut Park East Neighborhood Association. And by the way, I've lived in Walnut Park East for over 47 years. So that's but I've also been instrumental in founding what's called the St. Louis Vacancy Collaborative. And that is a coalition of community members, private and nonprofit stakeholders, city departments, and residents working together to reduce the number of vacancies and prevent vacancy in the first place.
Thank you. Kiara?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kiara Anderson. I am proudly a Black mom of a 1-year-old boy, a wife, a licensed Missouri real estate broker, and neighborhood advocate for my community that I live in, which is the West End neighborhood.
Thank you. Welcome to everyone. And so when we think about today's conversation, you know, it's a couple of questions that will kind of guide the conversation that we would like to share with our attendees to help ground them in the St. Louis region. And so we've heard a lot of ideas about what makes for an inclusive city and economy. What does it mean in terms for you, when you think about what does it mean for you to have an inclusive economy? And the second part to that is, what does it take to get there?
So I want to start and just take a stab at this. And so thank you to everyone before us that have shared a few of the common themes that I've heard is the aspects that plague the Black community. So whether if it's education, employment, being banked, at the foundation of this, what we're talking about is building human capital. And for me personally, I approach the work in community building with 3 layers that truly speak to my heart, and that is tolerance, humility, and patience. I'm not interested in leaving either of my brothers and sisters behind. So when I think about an inclusive community, an inclusive economy, 13 minutes in today's session, I believe Ms. Marla, she mentioned Black communities. And so as we talk a lot about inclusive communities, exactly who it plagues, it is the Black community. And so someone mentioned earlier the stats around education and unemployment. I do want to point out the fatherless homes. And so in 1960s, there were about 24% of fatherless homes. Today, we're at 76%. Children that grow up in these homes are 9 times more likely to actually go to prison, 6 times likely to drop out of high school, and 12 times more likely to live a life of poverty. So when we talk about inclusive communities, inclusive growth and economy, it's really important to consider those that have not. Many of us that attend our community meetings, we're there because of a certain level of privilege, whether if we have childcare, if we have enough sanity to leave out of our homes that day and actually attend a community meeting to discuss our needs and what it is that we would like to see in our neighborhood, we really have to be conscious and intentional around the needs and the issues that plague those in our neighborhoods that are less likely to attend to even discuss what they would like to see in our neighborhoods.
This is Julia.
Start.
I have a different perspective on that. My perspective is, I'm going to give you some numbers just about my neighborhood. We have over 2,500 vacant lots, period. We have a 45% vacancy rate in the fourth ward, and a 30% loss in the last 10 years of population. My reasons and what I found is this is because of policy. And one of the policies that was never implemented but is being done, they can say what they want to, is the Team 4 plan. It talks about preservation, conservation, and depletion. And if you look at any map and you look at North St. Louis, you can see where the depletion is, all that red area that's there. There's also institutional racism in the policies. And people don't want to even talk about Black flight from our neighborhoods. That's another issue. So, I mean, you know, we talk about Black middle class, we talk about that. I also believe that we have to collaborate. And as one of the young ladies said, stop living in our silos. Mm-hmm. Because we all think that we're afraid to share and communicate with one another. We are suffering from the same problems. We're scuffling for the same money. We have got to work together and stop living in our silos and stop letting people make bad policy for us. They made the Board of Aldermen in the city of St. Louis may never admit that that Team 4 plan has been implemented. But if you look at it and you look at the city, you know doggone well that that's what's in place.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to give my definition of an inclusive economy. I believe it creates multiple pathways of opportunity for people of all backgrounds and all types of cultures. And I believe it should enable them to be able to support their families and be able to thrive in their communities. What I think it will take for St. Louis to get there is to do two things. One, we have to retrain ourselves, retrain mentally how we think, because in St. Louis, we have an unconscious bias that exists. And we can no longer lean on and continue down a path of embracing the hundreds of years of polarizing segregation that has existed, because it has strangulated the growth and development of our city and region as a whole. And understanding that the triage approach, which was really what the Team 4 was trying to be about, that emergency room approach where you only help those that look like they will eventually be able to save themselves and recuperate and be healthy again. And those that look like they will never be healthy, you just kind of let them die on the vine. That triage approach does not work, but rather we need to adopt an approach where we measure our success, our progressiveness by those that are least fortunate in our neighborhoods, our most vulnerable populations. How are they living? Do they have the ability to thrive? So we have to make that paradigm shift, and we have to address our economic power brokers, our economic power base, to be committed. And that's where it's really going to start, dealing with them, to really be committed to creating a diversified table, their table. Some used to say it was civic progress. I don't know who it is today. But I tell you, it exists, and I'm not at the table. And that diversifying the table, it should be the same mix as the population. So that's the first thing we need to do, is to retrain ourselves. And then we need to repair the inequity. You cannot expect us to continue on, pick up and have diversity, and all of a sudden we can eventually get on an equal footing. So certain thoughts, ideas, and energy have to be given to repair the inequity that has existed since probably our inception as a state. Those are the things I think we must do: retrain ourselves, repair the inequity.
Thank you. And so, given that you all three represent different neighborhoods within the region, can you speak to why it's important to think about this work from a regional standpoint versus neighborhood, just the neighborhood? And what is the danger of not thinking about it from a regional standpoint versus, you know, oh, it's just this neighborhood, let's focus on this neighborhood, not the region.
This is Julie. I'm gonna take a historical point of view from the Black historic community. In my neighborhood, there is more Black history than any neighborhood in the city of St. Louis. I mean, my neighborhood is represented at the Smithsonian Institute. Why wouldn't a region be proud of all the wonderful, productive African-American people who have come out of this neighborhood, still live in this neighborhood, that have made great contributions to this country and worldwide? So I look at it from a cultural perspective. What city wouldn't be proud to have a thriving, historic Black neighborhood where people can come to visit? We do tours. If anybody is interested, I invite everybody to come and do a tour. My organization is called For the Ville. We have a website if you want to learn about our neighborhood.
Thank you. Anyone else like to weigh in?
Well, I just think that the neighborhoods honestly did not get into the situation in by themselves, and they're not going to be able to get out of it by themselves. And actually, it's going to take on a regional approach, and that's how we should be doing everything. For us to allow our city to be divided down one street, which some people call it the Delmar Divide, and have the highest concentration of poverty left in a huge race region called North St. Louis City. That is unmistakably one of the most unprogressive things we could have allowed to happen. And what I want to say is it takes all of us working together collaboratively, all hands on deck, working together as a region to bring us out of this.
Yeah. Just to quickly add to that, thank you, Julia and Sunday. The only thing that I would contribute in addition to that, which we spoke a lot about this, but working in silos, I don't think it makes sense at all to approach the work based on each neighborhood or each community. We have to be able to share our experiences and our learned experiences with each other, so as a collective, we see progress. So turning those challenges into an opportunity for us as a region that empowers people and our communities as a collective. So limit, again, those silos, building trust together, because I got a cousin that lives in the Ville, or I got a cousin that lives in this neighborhood. So building trust, and we all need that unity amongst each other.
Yes,
absolutely.
Thank you. And so the next question is kind of around development. So oftentimes as development happens, unfortunately, displacement happens. And so people don't always put the two together. And so if you all could speak to, as development is happening, how can we be sure that it doesn't displace residents who are already living in these communities, in these neighborhoods?
I think Sunday mentioned the Vacancy Collaborative. That's one way that we can really make sure we're not forgotten. I know a lot of us are busy and everything, but if we're not at the table and helping them to make those decisions, then don't start complaining when things start to change. Is, you know, you got to be a part of something. You got to take the time out to, you know, to do something, to be at the table. And a lot of times we have not been at the table for one reason or excuse or whatever, because racism, segregation, whatever you want to call it. But now we have an opportunity to actually be at the table.
And we should demand that space at the table. And also we have to convince policymakers and developers and contractors that there's a difference between community outreach and community engagement. Community outreach, you may show up at one meeting to present what you're developing and get impact from conversation from residents, and that's outreach. But community engagement is when you regularly are there at those meetings in that neighborhood.
Yep.
For the duration before and long after your project has been.
That's right.
And you're receiving feedback from residents, engaging each one, whether they're the president of that group, that neighborhood association or organization, or whether they're just the young lady or young man that lives down the street. You are actually having conversations. So we have to change the way we communicate. Community outreach is one thing, but we need community engagement, and we definitely need to be at the table, and we should demand it.
Thank you.
In the West End, we're doing a comprehensive community development plan. And a part of early on, a lot of the conversations and fears from residents were displacement. And so what will happen 10 years from now, just north of Del Mar, for this very attractive community? Will we be phased out of the community? Will we no longer be able to afford to pay our personal property taxes? What will happen with the seniors who are already on a fixed income? I have seen a number of tools in many of our community meetings, whether if it's a SID, a community improvement districts, special taxing districts, or whatever those tools may be. But I would say we have to be careful because we can unintentionally end up oppressing our own communities, even in that process. So to Julia's point, when we don't know, we also have to show up to be a part of the conversation, to learn and identify any opportunities that may cause that adverse sort of intention. But ultimately building those relationships and identifying the needs of the community is really important. So we can employ tools, and even looking beyond St. Louis.
Yeah,
maybe
absolutely.
Having some of our leaders in the St. Louis area, the leaders of the CDCs, the neighborhood associations, travel and learn from some of our brothers and sisters in a different part of the country.
Yeah. And I have to really go back on what Sunday and Kiara said. Developers have to engage with the people in our communities. They can't just come up with a plan and say, this is what we're gonna do. Because like one of the speakers said, they do not know what the people want in those neighborhoods. And we have a pretty good idea of what we want. I mean, look, you get this impression that these neighborhoods lack people who have education, lack people who are concerned. Well, the three of us are just examples of many people in neighborhoods like ours who are concerned, who want to be a part of the solution, who don't want developers just to come in and say, we're going to do this because of X, Y, Z. And then 10 minutes later, they're gone because they've gotten their money and they've gone. We've had developers come in my neighborhood, at least in the last 30 years, gonna do something. The money just evaporates and nobody holds them accountable for that. We don't want developers like that. We want people who are going to be part of our community, who are going to engage with the people, are going to get to know who we are and what we want.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you all for giving your time today and also sharing your thoughts and all that you do to advance our community and our region here. And so thank you all again. Before I turn it over to McCall, I just want to remind everyone that we have events to dive more into all of these conversations that are scheduled over the next few months. And I apologize, they're cutting the grass. Every time I'm on an important call, they're cutting the grass. I'm so sorry. So just know that we will have more events over the next few months to continue these conversations. Thank you, ladies, for your time. Thank you to all the presenters who've given their time. We are moving into the breakout sessions, but before we do that, I would like to turn it over to McCall. So thank you, everyone, and you'll take it from here.
Thank you so much, Miranda, and thank you for all the wonderful speakers. We are so thankful for the opportunity to hear from all of you. In just one moment, we will post link to the chat to join two breakout rooms that will be facilitated by our advisory committee. These are not presentations anymore, these are conversations, and we really hope you can join us for a dialogue about what we wrote today and discuss opportunities for our region to be more inclusive. Thank you so much for joining us today.